Drive down almost any street in New Orleans and it seems like you'll see a vacant or blighted property.
Many of the buildings that sit vacant are some of the most high profile in the city. Danny Monteverde explores why they sit untouched, what the plans are for them, and what the city can and can't do to help the blight fight.
These are buildings almost any New Orleanian will know, and these days they're known for one reason: being abandoned and in some cases blighted. But why do so many high-profile buildings in the city sit vacant for so long? Some are victims of Hurricane Katrina, and others are tied up in a complex business bureaucracy. Take, for example, Charity Hospital. It was in operation until the storm flooded its basement. Nearly 14 years and several false starts later, there could finally be some movement at Charity after the state signed an agreement with 1532 two-lane partners. The team has plans of transforming it into a $250 million office, residential, and retail building. That sounds good, but it's not easy. Take it from Pres Kabakov. He's the head of HRI Properties, which is responsible for major projects across the city during the last few decades.
These large projects are very complicated and very difficult.
Kabakov is one of the first people to help revive the warehouse district in the 1980s. His company was in the running to rehab Charity, but didn't make the cut. Until 1532 two-lane partners signs a lease for Charity, the old hospital still sits boarded up and fenced off.
We assume that they're sophisticated enough to bring it home, and that would be a good thing for the city.
The Plaza Tower is another example of the difficulties of getting a massive building open again after it closes. The high-rise had problems with asbestos, black mold, and leaks. That led to most tenants fleeing even before Katrina. And those weren't the only problems.
Most of the floor plate was occupied with elevators and stairwells, and so there wasn't much rentable square foot, and the building swayed back and forth and needed some structural repairs.
Property records show that these days it's owned by a company associated with local developer Joe Yeager. Calls seeking comment about plans for Plaza Tower weren't returned. Kabakov says he understands why there's no rush to revive the building.
As my father always told me, it was 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. You need to have a vision, but then you need to work your ass off to accomplish it. And it takes a lot of features.
Kabakov says a big problem with some of these big buildings is that post-Katrina population shifts changed so much about the city. Where there might have been a need for a hospital or performance space before the storm, that might not be necessary years later. The challenge is finding new uses for these buildings.
They're really opportunities. You have to then work with government in public-private partnership, but they're so well located that if you put the right attention, right vision, right horsepower in public-private partnership, you can bring them back into commerce with uses that weren't originally intended and improve entire neighborhoods.
One neighborhood that's been home to an eyesore since Katrina is the Lower 9th Ward. Plans call for 140 apartments to go into the old Holy Cross School building. The developer tells us plans are making their way through City Hall right now, and that's something the Cantrell administration confirms. But at the moment, the site's a mess. Unlike a lot of the other properties we've been to, the fence on the outside has been torn down in many spots. Let's take a look at the building itself. You can see many of the windows and doors are not boarded up anymore. They're open to the elements, open to the people, shredded tarps hanging down, the building, parts of it literally falling down. And if you take a look here where the doors used to be, none of them exist. That's open to anyone and anything.
Boarding it up didn't work. Constantine wire didn't work.
Rodney Dejois has lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. For almost 14 years, he's seen the building do nothing but fall down. He's hopeful something will change soon.
Get it done. Get it done. That's the solution is get it done, put it back in commerce, and I guess I'll have to roll with the punches.
Of the properties Eyewitness News looked at, the old Holy Cross building is an outlier in that it's not boarded up and it has an open blight case against it.
A vacant building is not a blighted building.
Deputy CAO Chad Dyer says there are minimum standards a property must meet to not be considered blighted by city law. A building or property must be secured, not overgrown, have no hazards on site, and they prefer a fence. And that's generally the case at the buildings we focused on. While they all meet the definition of an eyesore, all were boarded up, had their lawns mowed, and with the exception of the municipal auditorium, are behind fences.
We live in a country where you can own something and not necessarily occupy it. So a lot of the properties that would be vacant but not blighted, it may just be that the owner hadn't quite determined what they want to do with it.
Well, I'm optimistic. I think that those are important projects. They're well located. They seem to have developers with some experience in the game. So I would expect in 10 years all of those would be done.
Stay tuned. Danny Monteverde, Eyewitness News.
Guess we'll see. The buildings highlighted in this story are just a few of the ones that Danny looked into. Log on to WWLTV.com right now for an in-depth look at a number of other high-profile properties across the city and learn what plans, if any, there are for them.